Aleph Zero, is the entire project still salvageable? The community is very upset. Many from the community have sold and are now hating on this project, having lost a lot of money. And the price keeps falling and falling and falling. Not much has really happened since it's been in a downtrend for a year. And now we're going to take a look at that. Hey, welcome to the Crypto. A video that is not easy for me to make and where I must admit many mistakes. And I want to discuss that with you here. We're taking a look at Aleph Zero after a long time. Why? Why? Because simply not much new has come out. Although many products could have been hyped again, but if you just look at the transactions, there's not much going on anymore. What used to be Cardano, labeled as a ghost chain, can now also be said about Aleph Zero. Few transactions, little volume, and the price of Aleph Zero continues to go down. We can see that here. The AZERO token, or rather, the AZERO coin, call it what you want, has been since the 14th of March 2024. Today is the 18th of March 2025. It is actually in the thumb movement. Yes, small breakouts, everything is fine. They were there at one point. But those were also the opportunities perhaps for people to say, okay, now I will shift, or now I will exit. But overall, we see the downward regression channel, currently even quite in the middle. Small sideways phase a few days, but that could also settle again. LSU has a few problems, especially regarding the price issue. Namely, there are large wallets, the stakers, and also the recurring claim that the foundation itself sells its staking yields. Why and how they might actually do this, I would like to further explain here. But to prove this, one would have to track all transactions from the foundation nodes. And then also check which ones ended up on exchanges and in what amounts. To ultimately be able to say whether they sold or not, but this rumor or claim persists stubbornly. And as long as there are many stakers, there are naturally also many who sell their stakes directly. It's not always like in Germany, where taxes are then, you receive the money, you have to tax it directly. And the profit is tax-free after 1 year. No, in other countries you can sell it directly and then have returns. And many have, through just their staking returns, which they sold daily, weekly, or however, still make a profit even though the price is lower. Because at the end of the day, they have generated a lot of passive income. And that over weeks, months, and even now years. Yes, and that naturally continues to push down the LFZU price. In general, the big issue is missing when we look at the price, also the topic of exchanges. So, more exchanges are missing, and of course the adoption. LFZU had a huge problem from the beginning, namely, Aleph Zero quickly sparked a hype, had a big vision, but not really anything to deliver yet. Think about the early days when I also made videos and said, take a look at Aleph Zero, they have this and that planned. If all of that comes to fruition, they could really have a great future. And that convinced me back then, and it also got me into a kind of hype myself, where I said, this is an awesome project. Then the first exchanges came along. And this naturally also led to the token eventually being listed on one exchange, then another, and another. But to this day, the major exchanges are still missing. LSU also has a big problem, which I want to address at the end of the video, because it's simply unclear how things will proceed in the future. Shall we take a look at the ecosystem? And here I have a post from November 2023. And if we're being honest, yes, a couple of projects have indeed been added, but it hasn't really grown much more. And that's the big problem. You might miss a few projects here, but overall, not much has been added. And that's the big problem. LFZU made a bit of a miscalculation there, and that's the first reason why they might have actually sold. Namely, they sponsored a lot of events. Think of the crypto rockstars queues, where they were a sponsor even on the wristbands and were active as a sponsor alongside many other events at a big event in Berlin and many other events also in Poland. They were repeatedly a sponsor there, and of course that cost money. They were exhibitors, which cost money. They were everywhere and presented themselves, which might have been good. But at the time when they were actively doing this on a large scale, they didn't even have a finished product like Common. It was all still in the testing phase. So, was the marketing too early? This is a big question here, but at the end of the day, we have to say marketing needs money. That could be one of the reasons why they are really selling staking yields. But as mentioned, one would have to track all transactions. And that, I believe, takes days and in the end. Do you find something or do you find nothing? I am of the opinion that they generally use the collected money very well, but squandered it too early on marketing. They built a huge community. This community was quickly disappointed because the products they wanted to bring with their due diligence, privacy, and so on, so security is of course also a big issue. It just took way too long, and in the crypto market, the community is simply impatient. Everything that happens in the crypto market within 2 weeks feels like half a year in normal life. The crypto world is fast-paced, and when projects can't deliver, the community sentiment naturally shifts. And that's exactly what we have seen. So, the ecosystem hasn't really grown significantly. Many projects have also partially turned away or brought in a second blockchain. Darkverse, the game that I'm really excited to play and want to introduce to you, has now also found a second blockchain. That doesn't mean it won't also be released on Loswo, but they are now mainly working, at least according to their X profile, with another blockchain listed as a partner, no longer LSU at the top of the profile description. This simply shows that they are looking for alternatives, because they themselves are thinking about how everything will continue. If you go through the list here, I'll leave it open a bit longer. You'll notice that not much is missing from the current ones. So, few exchanges which don't really push the price up. And little ecosystem growth. But a partner we were all hyped about, including myself, until I found out why this partner is actually there, was Telecom. Many said at the beginning that this would be the thing, they would do marketing and so on. One has to be quite honest here. Telecom MMS is a company, and a company is profit-oriented. So why are they investing in LSU? Or rather, they didn't invest in LSU. They operated a staking node. And this staking node, I believe even now there are 2 or maybe even more, who knows. And these staking nodes, they are there to bring in profits. That means they generate income through transaction fees from other stakers because they take a small fee from that. That means, for example, there is a 15% return. You get paid 12% and they keep the 3%. And at the end of the day, they will also sell because it's a profit-oriented company. They also want to make profits. And if they operate a staking node, then it must of course also generate profits. At least cover the electricity costs and even better, generate profits. And that's why a partnership with Telecom is beneficial for the ecosystem and the stability of the blockchain. Due to the additional staking node, which will very likely run stably because it is provided by Telecom MMS, but it is still a profit-oriented company. And this profit-oriented company, to be honest, wants to make profits. And the AZERO earned there will naturally be sold, just like many others. Staking node operators and also stakers do this, which continuously pushes the price down. This naturally leads to the community being very dissatisfied and continuing to sell more. So we are in a downward price spiral. And this, yes, somehow feels like it has no bottom. During the journey with Aleph Zero, I met many people, for example, Anthony here at the Crypto Rockstars Qs. I really have to say, a very humorous guy, very funny, a really cool guy. So, in the moments when it was personal, it was really funny and we laughed a lot, made jokes, and it was really cool. In the moments when it was about business, he was really a tough guy, felt ice cold, he had such a fixed gaze and told you everything you wanted to know and negotiated. Also with people, I was present in some conversations where I thought, yes, this is really 2 different people at that moment, but in private, really a very funny, cool guy. And that naturally drew me back into the spell of Aleph Zero, making me say, yes, I find the project cool. The people behind it are great, because he's not the only one I've met. And back then I also got involved here because I have friends who are private investors in Aleph Zero. And I know now that many people immediately say, yes, he knows 1 or 2 there, because many people also know my connections. And I say very clearly here, not always. The most obvious thing is what one should think directly, or rather, what is also the truth. So, there are many private investors, but overall, also another problem of Levsu. And not the big or the large private investors. And that was always a point where many criticisms were expressed. And it was always said internally, so an internal message where it was always said, yes, but we still have a few tokens that we can offer at a discount to private investors. Currently, the price is so low, I think there's no need to offer anything at a discount. So it's very unfortunate that nothing has happened with the investors. And until then, further rumors persist, namely that private investors have long since sold. The whole thing is also difficult to trace, but you have repeatedly noticed, no matter in which Lefzu chat, in the big ones, that is, in the main chat, or also in the German chat, that there were always messages. With movements of several 100,000 ASU or movements of 60,000, 80,000 ASU. These could all be investors who got in early, bought early, and now want to at least pull out their last money. We also have to consider that, for example, the public sale price was at 10 cents, and these 10 cents, yes, let's be honest, they are almost there currently. So we are currently seeing 11,000 cents. If people invested in the public sale and now see, darn, I'm only 1 cent in profit, then they will naturally want to secure their last profits and sell here. So all of this can lead to the price falling even further. If it falls below 10 cents, the community will become very, very restless. We can already prepare ourselves for that. Yes, and after meeting many people and having such a great conversation with Anthony, and I have repeatedly reported about Aleph Zero and was also fascinated by what they plan to do, but was always skeptical because they hadn't delivered anything, yet there were always positive news. You have followed this Aleph Zero journey. As I said, I also let myself be carried away to make statements that weren't great. So, I made a statement in a live stream, and unfortunately, it was really clipped and repeatedly used. So, there was this one statement I made once. Yes, this Aleph Zero $100. That's absolutely possible. Yes, I let myself be carried away, but I was also joking around a bit in the chat and so on. The live stream, that was quite a while ago. This clip, or rather, this statement is unfortunately still remembered by many. Overall, I always believed, and I repeatedly said in the videos afterwards, that a price of $10, $15 would have actually been a great selling price. Currently, we are very, very far from that. So, I personally didn't think it would become so extreme. And by now, I also believe that private investors have long since exited, and that Aleph Zero no longer has any significant invested money from private investors because it's gone. Or they squandered it on marketing, or also on development. Let's think about Common. How many delays were there? How many other delays were there with other things? So, I believe overall that Aleph Zero now also has a financial problem within the foundation. Yes, and that was my Aleph Zero journey. So, in my eyes, I can only say sorry that I also hyped it up a bit. But I was caught up in the hype myself. Whether I sold myself, I don't even want to say, but I can only say I'm sitting on many losses. And these losses are not pleasant because I was, of course, also heavily invested in Aleph Zero. When you believe in such a project or are so convinced, you should naturally be invested yourself. So, it's not like I'm sitting here now. Good that you invested, that drove my prices up. No, I bought in earlier at high prices because I really wanted to get in quickly. And the FOMO kicked in for me. I can only say for myself, it's not pleasant. When you see the current prices now, yes. And then the journey continued by making many videos about Aleph Zero, and then the first German ambassadors were appointed, some of whom were in contact with the project very early on. Yes, it eventually reached the point where I was appointed as an ambassador. And that is also something that remains a big, big topic to this day. They created their list in Q1, and my name was included in it. I was appointed as an ambassador, and within the first 4 months, or it took 4 months, until I was no longer an ambassador overnight, yes, then the big issue was actually that I said strange. They opened many Discord channels for me, but for weeks they didn't tag us at all, meaning the new ambassadors. Then there was somehow an ambassador system, which means everyone has to complete tasks, just like you know from these various task platforms. And if you complete these tasks and have many points, then you get ranked a bit higher as an ambassador. Everyone starts again at 0. Although I must say there were core or brand ambassadors who were there from the beginning. Leave them in their positions, and everyone who follows should be equal and not. Ambassador 1, Ambassador 2, Ambassador 3. You always create a level like, this is my boss, this is my superior. I can only do the acquisition, meaning I can only write to projects or report a little about them. But when it gets down to the nitty-gritty or into partnerships, then it has to go a step higher. Yes, maybe it's also right that you then get in touch with a team for a partnership, but for external representation, it shouldn't make a difference whether a person is just an ambassador who maybe only makes videos or an ambassador who maybe only writes texts. Or a brand ambassador who might not be in the public eye at all and just chats a little. Write something. So, this topic is difficult, but I simply think it was approached incorrectly. And I still claim today that not all ambassadors are still in their positions. So, we have many problems here at Aleph Zero, and one of the biggest problems, and I stand by this, is that they are based in Poland and the foundation is in Switzerland. And one of the biggest problems is they also want to incorporate privacy. So, privacy cryptocurrencies, they are also listed under that on CoinMarketCap, or were once listed under that. And that is, of course, an issue because privacy coins are supposed to be abolished. At least in the EU, the whole thing is becoming much, much more difficult. That means they are based in the EU and can face many restrictions with their cryptocurrency. Let's think about the latest news. Gate.io. Gate.io lists Aleph Zero. Let's think about Gate.io. They list everything. For years, they were number one among exchanges that listed the most. At some point, Maxi came along and said, watch out, we're taking that rank. But Gate.io was unchallenged at number one for years. They listed every piece of junk and included everything in their exchange, every bonus program, and so on. And there are so many allegations of fraud, and even major influencers have had problems with Gate.io. And the list, now, Aleph Zero. That leaves a very strange aftertaste. No matter which exchange comes next, because they said a big exchange is still coming as they want to balance it somehow, but maybe big exchanges should start coming slowly, no matter if something gets delisted somewhere. So there are somehow false signals here. Yes, we got kicked out somewhere with money. Yes, then we have to somehow find an alternative. No, look for exchanges directly, but overall, I believe that many exchanges don't even want to list you. That is the big problem. Problems like even getting in or paying the listing fees, because of course the volume isn't there, so we have to pay the full listing fees, and these are sometimes very, very high, even if the prices might be low right now. The fear and greed index is down, the old prices, everything is at the bottom. Nevertheless, the exchanges want to make their money, and especially in such times, we naturally want full listing fees. That's why it's quite difficult for everyone to get onto new exchanges. And if major exchanges had really been interested, this listing should have happened long ago. I can only say again, I am truly very sorry that I hyped up Aleph Zero so much here, that I let myself be carried away into making statements that I really regret in hindsight, that I really pulled many people into this project because I was so convinced of it myself. I was so convinced that I wrote down everything that happened with Aleph Zero at the time, or rather, what a complete package it is. Actually, it's Aleph Zero. And this whole package really convinced me to say, this is a cool blockchain. What was delivered in the end and what happened and the fact that this project had a huge community initially left me speechless. But then there weren't really any successes, or rather development successes, releases, and new partnerships. And that eventually makes you very suspicious over time on this journey. Now the question is, how do you proceed from here? So if you still have Aleph Zero, yes. One can actually assume that once Donald Trump is done with his trade war to ultimately achieve low interest rates, these low interest rates could lead to the markets picking up again and investments returning. And that means one can actually assume that the market will rise again due to cheap money coming from the USA. But that is still a long time away. And during this long period, the staking nodes can continue to sell because they naturally want to secure their money, or rather, they want to get what they can still receive for the AZERO. And of course, they also want to pay their electricity costs. That's why the question of when to sell, whether to sell now or wait a bit longer, is quite difficult. A very tricky situation. It could go down further below 10 cents. I think it will become very uncomfortable in the community then. Although it is already very uncomfortable in the community now. The community, which was far too large from the beginning, far too inflated, for which I also bear some responsibility in the German community. And also other influencers and let's say large X accounts who have promoted it very early on, or rather talked about it very early on. I want to make one thing clear again. I have never received anything from Aleph Zero, whether as an ambassador, which I was for 4 months, without even being in this project or in this team or in a meeting. Or even as a YouTuber, I have never received a single cent from Aleph Zero. I let myself be extremely dazzled and invested a lot of personal money in the hope of becoming successful in this project. At the end of the day, I was taught a much better lesson. And Aleph Zero is just one of many blockchains that have essentially been swept under the rug. Many blockchains that always claimed, we are the company killer. We will eventually be in the top 50 because we are a widely used blockchain. At the end of the day, they didn't end up there. And the price, as we can see, is very low. So it's not nice, what's happening here. Unfortunately, I can't give you any advice on how to proceed. I can only tell you that it looks very, very bleak right now. and no one knows where it will go from here. Feel free to write in the comments what you think about it. Or feel free to insult me. If you want, I've been getting a lot of that in recent months, especially regarding LFZ, but I definitely owe you this video. And I hope you can understand me a little and maybe also forgive me a bit on this whole topic. But I know that the whole thing is quite difficult and that I have also made mistakes. And I admit these here as well. And I hope that you can understand me a little and still forgive me. I apologize and hope that your losses are kept to a minimum. In this sense, thank you very much for watching and see you in the next video.
You